I make sweet tea the way my mother taught me. You bring the water to a boil, you drop in the bags, you let them steep until the color looks right. Not too pale, not too dark. And then you add the sugar while it's still hot so it dissolves all the way through. You don't rush it. You can't rush it. I was standing at the kitchen counter doing exactly that when my phone rang. It was a Saturday in October. The light was coming in sideways through the window above the sink, that particular October light that makes everything look a little golden and a little sad at the same time. I had my apron on. I had nowhere to be. I let it ring twice before I picked up. It was my daughter-in-law, Naomi. She didn't say hello. She said, "Mom." That's what she calls me. She has called me that since the 3rd month she was dating my son, Elliot. She said it the first time, that she was testing it out, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed. And when I didn't correct her, she just kept saying it. I never told her how much it meant to me. I should have told her how much it meant to me. I should have told her. She said, "Mom," and then she stopped. I set the spoon down on the counter. I said, "Naomi, where are you?" She said she was in her car. She was parked outside the Walgreens on Clement Street, about 6 blocks from the house she shared with Elliot. She had been sitting there for 40 minutes. She didn't know why she called me instead of Elliot. She said she didn't want to worry him. I asked her what happened. She said, "I think I just need someone to tell me I'm not crazy." I said, "You're not crazy. Now tell me what happened." My son Elliot is 41 years old. He works in logistics, the kind of job that sounds boring when you describe it, but that he is genuinely, almost embarrassingly good at. He married Naomi 3 years ago in a small ceremony at a botanical garden in Marin County. She wore her grandmother's earrings. He cried before she even made it halfway down the aisle. I have never loved him more than I did in that moment. Naomi is 38. She teaches 2nd grade at a public school in the Richmond district. She brings her students granola bars out of her own pocket when she thinks they haven't had breakfast. She grades papers at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings in her pajamas, with reading glasses. She doesn't actually need yet, but started wearing anyway because she thought they made her look more authoritative. She told me that once, and I laughed for about 2 minutes straight. She is the daughter I did not have. My daughter-in-law is the kind of woman who sends thank you notes. Not emails, actual cards in envelopes with stamps. The first time she did it, after I had them over for Thanksgiving, her first year with Elliot, I stood in my hallway holding that card for a long time. It had a little sketch of a pie on the front, because I had made a pecan pie, and she had told me twice that it was the best thing she had ever eaten. She had gone home and found a card with a pie on it. I kept that card. It's in the drawer of my nightstand right now. My husband's sister is a woman named Dottie. Dottie is 58 years old. She is 3 years younger than me and has spent most of those 3 years reminding me of it in one way or another. She was there the first Christmas I spent with the family, 35 years ago, and she looked me up and down the way you look at a piece of furniture someone brought in from the curb, like she was trying to figure out whether it was worth keeping or whether it was just going to take up space. She never warmed up. My husband Walter passed 6 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. There are some things that happen to you that reshape the entire landscape of everything that came before them, and everything that comes after, and losing Walter was that for me. I won't say more about it than that because I could fill 100 pages and it still wouldn't be enough. After Walter died, Dottie called me 3 times. 3 times in 11 weeks, in the days right after. And then almost nothing, a few texts on holidays. A comment here and there on Facebook. I understood. People grieve differently. People don't know what to say. I gave her the benefit of the doubt because that is what Walter would have wanted. But she never extended that same grace to Naomi. I don't know what Dottie decided about Naomi, or when, or exactly why. I have my theories. Naomi came into the family after Walter was gone, and I think some part of Dottie resented that Elliot had found a life that felt whole without his father in it. I think she resented me too, a little, for being close to Naomi when I was supposed to be permanently diminished. I think she is a woman who decided a long time ago that some people belong and some people don't, and that she was the one doing the deciding. What I know for certain is that she made Naomi feel it, not loudly, not in ways that were easy to point to. A comment at Easter about how Naomi's stuffed mushrooms were interesting. A story told at Thanksgiving that started with, back when this was just the family, and didn't correct itself when Naomi was sitting right there. A way of directing every conversation through Elliot, as if Naomi were a guest who had overstayed and didn't speak the language well enough to be addressed directly. Naomi never complained to me. I saw it. I never pushed her to name it because I believed that Dottie would eventually come around. That is my failure. I want to say that plainly. I waited too long. What happened on that Saturday in October was this. Elliot had a work trip. He left Thursday morning and wasn't due back until Sunday evening. He called every night. He is a good husband. Dottie knew he was away because she had called the house Wednesday to confirm some detail about a family dinner the following month, and Naomi had answered and mentioned it. She shouldn't have had to think twice about mentioning it. She was just making conversation. Saturday morning, Naomi was home alone. She was grading papers and doing laundry. She had a podcast playing. She told me it was one of those true crime ones she likes, which she always listens to when Elliot isn't home because he has no patience for them. She said she was having a good morning. She said that specifically. She said, I was actually having a good morning. Dottie showed up at 11:15 without calling. Naomi saw her through the window before she answered the door and felt the thing she always felt, that small brace, that internal gathering of herself, and answered anyway because she is a courteous woman and Dottie is family, or is supposed to be. Dottie said she was in the neighborhood. She said she wanted to drop something off. She had a small bag from a bakery, one of those white paper bags with the handles, and she held it out and Naomi thanked her and invited her in, because of course she did. They sat at the kitchen table. Naomi made coffee. She told me she made it carefully, the good stuff, because she was trying. She is always trying. She is always trying. For the first few minutes it was ordinary. Dottie asked about Elliot's trip. She asked about the school when Naomi teaches, in the way she always asks, without any real curiosity, just the shape of a question. Naomi answered. She told me she was starting to think maybe this was going to be fine. And then Dottie set down her coffee cup. She set it down in a particular way, not careless and not loud, but deliberate. And Naomi said she felt something change in the room when she did it. She said she didn't know how else to describe it. The air moved differently. Dottie said, I want to talk to you about something. Naomi said, okay. Dottie said she was concerned. She said she had been thinking about the family and about Elliot's well-being, and she felt like someone needed to say something honest, and since she was the only one willing to do that, she was going to say it. Then she said this. She said that Naomi was a perfectly nice person, but that the family had a particular way of doing things, a particular history, and that Naomi had never really made the effort to understand that. She said that Elliot had changed since he married Naomi, that he was more distant, that he came to family things less, that he had pulled away. She said she wasn't blaming Naomi exactly, but that she thought Naomi should understand that she had never fully fit in, and that the rest of the family felt it too, even if they were too polite to say so, she said, and these are the words that Naomi repeated to me on the phone, quietly, like she was still not sure she had heard them right. She said, "You've always been a guest here, Naomi. I think part of you knows that." Naomi sat there. She told me she didn't say anything for a long moment. She was waiting to feel something concrete, anger maybe, or tears. But what she felt instead was something more like a strange calm, the kind that comes when something you have half suspected for a long time is finally said out loud. She said, "I think you should go, Dottie." Dottie picked up the bakery bag from where she had set it on the table, put it back in her purse, and left. Naomi sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes. Then she got in her car and drove until she was parked outside the Walgreens on Clement Street, and then she called me. I drove to her. I didn't think about it. I took off my apron and I picked up my keys and I drove. She was still in the car when I pulled up. I parked behind her and I got in the passenger seat and she looked at me and I looked at her and she said, "I don't want Elliot to think his family is a problem." I said, "You let me handle what Elliot thinks." She said, "I just want to know if I did something wrong." I said, "No." She said, "She took the pastries back." I said, "I know." And then, because I couldn't help it, I said, "She drove all the way over there to be unkind to you on a Saturday morning, and she still took the pastries back." And Naomi laughed, just a short, surprised laugh, and then she put her face in her hands and cried. I sat with her. I didn't tell her it was going to be okay, because I didn't know yet what I was going to do. I knew what I was going to do would be enough, but I didn't know the shape of it yet. So I just sat with her. I put my hand on her back the way I used to do for Elliot when he was small and sick and needed someone to just be in the room. When she was steadier, I said, "Come home with me." I had a conversation with Elliot that night. He called at his usual time, 8 o'clock, and I had Naomi in the other room watching something on television with the volume turned low, and I carried my phone into the kitchen, and I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a long time. I know my son's silences. I know the difference between the one that means he is processing and the one that means he is trying to manage how angry he is. This was the second one. He said, "She said Naomi was a guest." I said, "Yes." He said, "In our house." I said, "Yes." He was quiet again. He said, "Mom, I need you to tell me honestly. Has this been going on for a long time?" I said, "I think Naomi has been managing it for as long as I have known her, and managing it gracefully, and you should know that." He came home the next morning. He rearranged his flight. He called me from the airport at 6 a.m. to say he was on his way. I want to be precise about what I did next, because I want it to be clear that I thought it through. I am 63 years old, and I have learned, not quickly and not without cost, that the most important decisions should not be made in the heat of the feeling. You sit with it. You let it cool just enough that you can see its shape clearly, and then you act. I called Dottie. She answered on the second ring. She sounded pleased to hear from me, which told me she thought the conversation had gone the way she intended it to. I said, "I know what you said to Naomi yesterday." Silence. I said, "I want to give you the chance to explain yourself." She said she had just been honest. She said someone in the family had to be, and she had thought I would appreciate that. She said she had done it for Elliot's sake. She said, and this part I want to remember exactly, she said, "You know as well as I do that she's never really been one of us." I said, "Dottie, Naomi has been one of us since the day she walked into my son's life. She has sent flowers when people were sick. She remembered your mother's birthday for 4 years running when half of us forgot. She has been nothing but gracious to you in the face of treatment that was not gracious. And she is carrying my grandchild." Dottie said, "What?" I had not meant to say it that way. Elliot and Naomi were still in the early months, and had been careful about who they told. But it was said. I said, "Naomi is pregnant, 12 weeks, and you sat at her kitchen table and told her she was a guest in her own family." The silence this time was different. I said, "I want to be very clear with you about what happens now. You will not contact Naomi again without her inviting you to. You will not show up at their home. You will not send messages through other family members. If Elliot chooses to speak with you, that is his decision. But Naomi's done with being made to feel like a visitor, and I am done pretending I don't see it." Dottie said, "You can't just cut me out of the family." I said, "I'm not cutting you out of anything. I'm telling you that the price of admission is treating my daughter-in-law like she belongs there, and that is a price I've watched you refuse to pay for 3 years. That is your choice. This is mine." I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a while. I made another cup of tea. Outside, the neighbour's dog was barking at something and then stopped, and it was quiet. I called my brother-in-law Sherman. He is Walter's younger brother, 70 years old, a retired electrician who has never in his life said anything he didn't mean. He was at a family barbecue when Elliot brought Naomi for the first time, and he shook her hand and said, "Well, I can see why he kept you around," and Naomi had smiled for the rest of the afternoon. I told him what had happened, all of it. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I have always appreciated about Sherman. When I was done, he said, "Did she take the pastries back?" I said, "She did." He said, "Lord." He said he would make some calls, not to create drama. Sherman has no interest in drama, but because he believed, as I do, that silence in the face of unkindness is a form of agreement, and he was not willing to agree. Elliot sat with Naomi for 2 days when he got home. I gave them space. I stayed nearby in case they needed me, but I didn't insert myself. Some things a husband and wife need to work through in their own house, in their own time, and my job was to be available and not to be present. On Tuesday evening, Naomi called me. She said, "Elliot wants to send Dottie a letter." I said, "Okay." She said, "He wrote it and then he read it to me and I told him I wanted him to send it. I wanted you to know. I asked if she was all right. She said, 'I feel something I haven't felt in 3 years. I keep trying to figure out what it is.'" She thought for a moment. She said, "I think it's that I stopped bracing myself." The letter Elliot sent Dottie was direct and, I was told, thorough. He did not ask for an apology on behalf of himself. He asked for one on behalf of his wife. He told Dottie that he was aware, in retrospect, of more than he had let himself acknowledge. The comments, the patterns, the way Naomi had been treated at family gatherings, and that his awareness of it and his silence was something he would have to sit with. He told her that his family was Naomi and the child they were expecting, and that any relationship Dottie wanted to have with that family would require starting from a different place than the one she had been in. He did not threaten. He did not perform. He said what was true. Dottie did not respond to the letter for 3 weeks. When she did, it was a phone call to Elliot, not to Naomi. She did not apologize. She said she was hurt that things had gotten to this point, and that she felt she was being made into a villain when she had only been trying to protect the family. Elliot told her he understood that was how it felt to her, and that he needed her to understand how it had landed. She said she would think about it. That was 4 months ago. She has not come back to us. That is her choice, and I have made peace with it, in the way you make peace with something. Not by deciding it doesn't hurt, but by deciding the hurt is acceptable in exchange for what you're protecting. There are things I know now that I wish I had done sooner. I wish I had named what I saw earlier. Not loudly, not in a way that created a scene, but clearly and to the right people at the right time. I watched Naomi brace herself at family dinners for 3 years, and I told myself she was managing it and she was fine and it would sort itself out. She was managing it, but fine is not the same as fine. I wish I had said to Dottie years ago at a quiet moment, I need you to try harder with her. For Elliot's sake, if not for hers. I don't know if it would have changed anything. But I didn't try, and I don't know. What I do know is this. When Naomi called me from that parking lot on Clement Street, she was not asking me to fix it. She was not asking me to go to war. She said she just needed someone to tell her she wasn't crazy. You are not crazy. What you felt was real. What you experienced was real. What you experienced was real, and you were always, always one of us. In February, Elliot sent me a photo from their kitchen table. Naomi is in it, sideways, in her pajamas, reading glasses on, grading papers. There is a bowl of cereal next to her, and she hasn't touched it yet. Her hand is on her stomach, not like she's doing it for the photo, just resting there, natural, the way you settle into something that is yours. I saved that photo. It's on my phone, and I look at it sometimes in the morning when I'm making coffee. There is a particular kind of love that does not announce itself. It just shows up when it needs to, and it stays, and it does what needs to be done, and then it goes back to making sweet tea and minding its own business until the next time. My mother used to say that you know a family by what it protects. I know what we protect. I have always known. It just took me too long to say it out loud. The baby is due in May. They are painting the nursery yellow because they don't know yet, and they said they'd rather have something that feels like sunshine. I helped them take the trim last weekend. We had the radio on. Naomi painted, and I did the edges, and Elliot kept offering to help, and we kept telling him he was doing great just by staying out of the way, and he laughed every time like it was still funny, and it kind of was. That evening, after we cleaned the brushes and ate the pizza Elliot had ordered, we sat on their back porch for a while as it got dark. The city was doing what it does. Someone down the block was playing music. The air had that almost spring feeling where it's still cold, but you can tell something is about to shift. Naomi leaned her head on my shoulder. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. You don't have to fill every moment with words. Some of them are already full. I have been thinking in the months since all of this about what it actually costs a person to stay quiet. Not the dramatic kind of quiet. Not the silence of cowardice or indifference. I mean the quiet of someone who is trying to be gracious. The quiet of a woman like Naomi, who showed up to every family dinner and made the coffee carefully and sent the thank you cards and absorbed 3 years of small cruelties without naming them, because she loved my son and she wanted his family to be something whole. That kind of quiet has a price. It is paid slowly in increments, and the person paying it often doesn't realize how much they've spent until the bill comes due all at once. Naomi's bill came due on a Saturday morning in October, in her own kitchen, across a table from a woman who had driven over specifically to deliver it. What I know about cause and effect, not the mystical kind, just the plain human kind, is that the things we allow continue. Not because the universe is keeping score, but because people are. The person being unkind learns, over time, that the unkindness is acceptable, that there are no real consequences, that they can show up without calling, say what they came to say, take back the pastries and go home unchanged. Every time that cycle completes without interruption, it calcifies. It becomes the shape of the relationship. I allowed that cycle to run for 3 years. I told myself Naomi was managing, and she was, but managing and thriving are not the same thing, and I knew the difference, and I chose the more comfortable interpretation. That is on me. I say that not to punish myself, but because I think it is important to be accurate about your own failures if you want to learn anything from them. What I did when Naomi called was not heroic. I drove across the city and sat in a passenger seat and put my hand on someone's back. I made a phone call I should have made sooner. I said clearly to the person who needed to hear it that the behavior was over and the terms had changed. That is not heroism, that is just being a person who decides at a certain point that clarity is kinder than comfort. Elliot's letter to Dottie was the same thing. He didn't perform outrage, he didn't issue ultimatums designed to wound. He said what was true, named what he could now see, and held the line. That is what moral courage actually looks like from the inside. Not loud, not theatrical, just clear and consistent, and willing to live with whatever comes from it. What came from it was that Dottie chose her pride over her family. That is a consequence she authored, not one anyone handed her. What also came from it was Naomi 4 months later, telling me she had stopped bracing herself. That is the thing I come back to. Not the confrontation, not the letter, not the satisfying clarity of finally naming what had been true all along. What I come back to is that phrase. She had stopped bracing herself. 3 years of gathering herself every time she walked into a room, every time a holiday came around, every time she answered the door. And then, one October, it stopped being necessary. That is what it is worth to say the thing out loud. That is what it is worth to act when you see something that needs to be corrected. Not the drama of it, not the resolution, just the fact that someone you love gets to walk into a room without steeling themselves first. The baby is due in May. The nursery is yellow. I keep thinking that child is going to grow up in a family that knows what it protects, and I think that's the most important thing I could have done. Not the phone call to Dottie, not the conversation with Elliot. Just making sure that the family this baby is born into is one where belonging isn't conditional on someone else's approval. You build that quietly over time by choosing it again and again. That's all. That's the whole thing.